Maybe you should eat upstairs." My daughter-in-law, Sienna, stood in the doorway of my kitchen, holding a glass of wine. She wore an elegant velvet dress and looked completely out of place beside my flour-covered hands and faded Christmas apron. I had been awake since 5 that morning preparing Christmas dinner. The turkey roasted in the oven, filling the house with the smell of sage, butter, and cinnamon. The same comforting scent that had filled these rooms every December for nearly 30 years. Sienna glanced at my apron before smiling politely. "We didn't really plan this dinner as your kind of thing, Marjorie. My friends are here. It's more of a younger crowd. You'd probably be more comfortable upstairs watching television." Behind her stood my son, Caleb. He stared at the floor. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me. I was 64 years old, and this was my house. My name was the only one on the deed. I paid the property taxes, the utilities, the insurance, and every grocery bill. Yet somehow I had just been invited to leave my own dining room. 8 months earlier, I never would have imagined this. Caleb had called me one evening, explaining that the rent on his apartment had become too expensive. He and Sienna were trying to save enough money for a down payment on a house. "Just for a few months, Mom," Caleb had promised. "We'll pay our share." I loved my son. So I agreed. That was my first mistake. I untied my apron slowly and folded it on the counter, but I didn't go upstairs. Something had changed inside me. For months, I had confused patience with surrender, and the truth was, my home hadn't been taken from me in one dramatic moment. It had happened gradually. The first warning came in April. I walked into the kitchen one Tuesday morning and discovered my heavy espresso machine shoved into a corner. In its place sat Sienna's expensive cold brew machine. When she came downstairs, she noticed me staring at it. "Oh, I thought we could modernize the coffee station," she said. "Your machine made everything look cluttered." I like my machine where it was. I unplugged hers and returned mine to the counter. Sienna's smile disappeared. A few weeks later, she decided my living room needed an upgrade. I came home from the grocery store and found the antique oak coffee table my late husband and I had purchased years ago sitting in the garage. A glass and metal table had replaced it. "It opens up the room," Sienna explained. Caleb sat beside her, nodding. I didn't argue. I simply walked into the garage. "Caleb," I called. "Come help me." He looked confused. "Mom, now." He reluctantly stood. Together we carried my oak table back into the living room. Sienna watched in silence. That was when I realized something important. Caleb wasn't cruel. He was weak. He avoided confrontation. And Sienna had learned that if she pushed hard enough, he would eventually let her have her way. But I wasn't going to become a passenger in my own house. By August, money became another battlefield. When they moved in, Caleb promised to contribute toward utilities and groceries. For the first 2 months, he did. Then the payments stopped. One evening, he approached me nervously. "Mom, things are tight right now, I understand. Sienna had to buy some equipment for her business. Could you cover the electricity and water for a while?" I closed my book. "You're 32, Caleb. You're employed. I can pay my expenses, but I won't pay yours." Sienna appeared in the doorway. "But it's the same house," she said. "The lights are already on." I picked up the latest electric bill. "The electricity bill has nearly doubled since you moved in." Her expression hardened. "We're trying to build a future." "And I gave you a roof," I replied. "I'm not your bank." The next week, I discovered that Sienna had been ordering premium groceries using my credit card, organic steaks, impermed cheese, expensive sparkling water. I didn't confront her. I simply canceled the card and ordered a replacement. The following delivery was declined. Sienna stormed into the living room. "The card doesn't work." "I know. You canceled it?" "Yes." She stared at me. "You'll need to use your own card from now on." For the first time, she understood something she should have understood 8 months earlier. My generosity was not an unlimited resource. And I was finally done pretending it was. By November, I had stopped pretending the situation would fix itself. Sienna had learned that every boundary I created was something she could test. The next battle was over my husband's old study. The room sat on the ground floor at the end of a quiet hallway. It had been his favorite place in the house. His oak desk still stood beside the window, surrounded by books he had collected over decades. My sewing machine rested in the corner, and the afternoon sunlight always made the room feel warm. It was the one place where I could still feel close to him. One afternoon, I returned from an appointment and immediately noticed the study door standing wide open. I heard Sienna talking inside. When I stepped through the doorway, I stopped. Camera equipment covered the floor. A large box had been placed beside my husband's desk, and my sewing machine had been pushed into the hallway. Sienna was rearranging furniture. "What are you doing?" She barely looked at me. "I need a proper workspace for my business. The bedroom lighting is terrible. You moved my things without asking." "I figured you weren't really using this room." I stared at her. "I use it every day. You sit in here and read." Her tone carried a quiet insult. "You can read anywhere." I looked at my husband's desk, then at my sewing machine sitting on the floor. For a moment, I felt the old instinct to explain myself. I could have told her what this room meant to me. I could have reminded her how many years my husband had worked at that desk. But something stopped me. People who respected you didn't need a sentimental explanation before respecting your boundaries. I walked over to her camera equipment. I lifted the largest box and carried it into the hallway. "Hey, I picked up another one." "Sienna, what are you doing? You're taking your things out of my study." She froze. "Your study?" "Yes." I pointed toward the hallway. "You have 10 minutes. Her face reddened. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said calmly. "What's ridiculous is you deciding that a room belonging to me automatically belongs to you." She opened her mouth, but I didn't give her another opportunity to argue. I continued moving her equipment. 10 minutes later, everything she owned was outside the study. I closed the door. Then I drove to the hardware store. I purchased a heavy-duty lock and installed it myself. When I turned the key for the first time, I heard the solid click of the mechanism. It was a small sound, but it felt enormous. That evening, Caleb knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom, come in." He stayed in the doorway. "Did you lock the study?" "Yes. Sienna needs somewhere to work. She can use the dining table. She has video meetings. Then she can use the dining table." He sighed. "Mom, we're all living here." I looked at him carefully. "No, Caleb, you and Sienna are staying here. There was a difference." He didn't answer. December arrived beneath a blanket of snow. For 30 years, Christmas had been my favorite day of the year, not because of expensive decorations or large parties, because of tradition. My husband and I had always prepared a small dinner. Turkey, sage stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, and my mother's pecan pie. It was simple. It was ours. 2 weeks before Christmas, Sienna walked into my kitchen carrying her phone. "I've made plans for Christmas." I continued chopping celery. "Oh, my parents are coming, my sister too, and some friends from the city." I stopped chopping. "How many people?" "About 10. You invited 10 people into my house without asking me." Sienna gave me a strange look. "We live here too." "You're staying here," I corrected. She ignored that. "I sent you the menu." I looked at her. "The menu?" "Yes. Some of my friends are vegan and my sister is doing keto. You'll need to make adjustments." For a moment, I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She expected me to buy the food, cook it, serve it, and then disappear upstairs while she entertained her guests. I smiled. "All right." Sienna seemed satisfied. She walked away. She didn't notice that I hadn't agreed to anything. Over the next 2 weeks, packages arrived constantly. Tablecloths, decorations, wine glasses, centerpieces. Everything was addressed to Sienna. She talked excitedly on the phone about the Christmas dinner she was hosting. I said nothing. Instead, I made my own preparations. I bought the ingredients for my traditional meal. I ordered a small turkey. I bought fresh cranberries, potatoes, butter, sage, and the ingredients for my pecan pie. I didn't buy tofu. I didn't buy special keto flour. I wasn't preparing Sienna's dinner. I was preparing mine. Then I made one more decision. I rented a small storage unit. Quietly, I moved my jewelry, important documents, family photographs, and several irreplaceable keepsakes out of the house. I didn't tell Caleb. I didn't tell Sienna. I wasn't planning an attack. I was protecting what belonged to me. By Christmas Eve, I had finally accepted something I had resisted for months. The woman who had welcomed her son and daughter-in-law into her home was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that kindness without boundaries eventually becomes permission. And Christmas Day was going to be the day those boundaries became impossible to ignore. Christmas morning arrived beneath a heavy blanket of snow. The house was unusually quiet when I woke at 5. I slipped into the kitchen, tied my faded holly print apron around my waist, and began preparing dinner. For the first time in weeks, I felt strangely calm. There was something comforting about following a familiar routine. I peeled potatoes. I prepared the stuffing. I seasoned the turkey with sage, butter, salt, and pepper. By noon, the kitchen was warm, and the windows had fogged from the heat of the oven. The smell of roasting turkey filled the entire house. I was arranging the pecan pie when Sienna finally appeared downstairs. She wore a silk robe and had a sheet mask covering most of her face. She looked at the kitchen. Then she looked at me. "Where are the stuffed mushrooms?" I continued arranging the pie. "And the vegan roast?" "I didn't make them." She slowly pulled the mask from her face. "What? I made my Christmas dinner." Her eyes widened. "I gave you the menu 2 weeks ago." "I remember. My guests are arriving at 5. "I know. You can't be serious." I washed my hands and dried them with a towel. "I am." Sienna's face turned red. "You're ruining Christmas." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm preparing the dinner I have prepared every Christmas for 30 years. I don't have time to cook." "You still have several hours." "I have to get ready." "That sounds like your problem." She stared at me as though she had never heard anyone speak to her that way. Caleb rushed into the kitchen. "What happened?" "Sienna's Christmas dinner is ruined because your mother refuses to help." Caleb looked between us. "Mom," I shook my head. "Don't." He stopped. "You promised we'd have a nice Christmas," he said quietly. I promised myself I'd have a nice Christmas too. Neither of them answered. Sienna immediately grabbed her phone and started searching for restaurants that might deliver. It was Christmas Day. Almost everything was closed. I watched her become increasingly frantic while I calmly poured myself a cup of tea. For months, I had carried their problems, their bills, their groceries, their convenience, their expectations. Today, I finally put them down. At 5:30, the guests began arriving. Sienna's parents came first, followed by her sister and several friends. They carried bottles of wine and expensive gifts, the house filled with loud conversation and laughter. I stayed in the kitchen. I finished the gravy. I carved the turkey. I arranged the stuffing and potatoes in serving dishes. Then I carried everything into the dining room. The table looked beautiful. My best plates were polished. The silverware was arranged properly. Candles flickered in the centerpieces Sienna had ordered. For one brief moment, it looked like the Christmas dinners I remembered. Then Sienna walked into the room. She was wearing a deep red velvet dress. She looked at me, then she looked toward her guests. "Maybe you should eat upstairs." The room went quiet. I stared at her. She continued. "We didn't really plan this dinner as your kind of thing. My friends are here. It's a younger crowd. You'd probably be more comfortable watching television." Caleb stood behind her. His eyes dropped to the floor. Again. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not my heart. My patience. I untied my apron. I folded it carefully. Then I placed it on the sideboard, but instead of walking upstairs, I walked toward the dining table. I pulled out the large chair at the head. My chair. The chair where my husband had sat for decades. I sat down. Everyone stared at me. I smiled politely. "Please sit." Nobody moved. I reached into my pocket and placed a spare set of car keys on the table. They were the keys Caleb had been using to drive my sedan. Then I placed my house Wi-Fi router beside them. Sienna frowned. "What are you doing?" I looked directly at her, taking back what belongs to me. Caleb finally looked up. "Mom, you and Sienna have 30 days to move out." The room became completely silent. I continued. "You need to be completely gone by January 25th. If you're still here after that date, the locks will be changed." Sienna's mouth fell open. "You can't do this." I raised an eyebrow. "My name is on the deed." Her father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Her mother looked at her plate. Nobody defended her. I picked up the serving spoon. I placed a generous portion of stuffing on my plate. Then I looked toward Sienna's sister. "Would you pass the butter, please?" After a moment, she silently handed it to me. I smiled. Thank you. Slowly, everyone took their seats. Sienna sat at the opposite end of the table, her face burning with humiliation. Caleb looked as though he had just realized the ground beneath him was no longer stable. I didn't care. I served the turkey. I poured gravy over my potatoes. And I enjoyed my Christmas dinner. For the first time in 8 months, I wasn't eating like a guest in my own home. I was exactly where I belonged, at my table, in my house, and in control of my own life again. The guests left before 9. One by one, they offered awkward excuses about the snow, the roads, and the early morning ahead. Nobody mentioned what had happened at dinner. Nobody needed to. The moment the front door closed behind the last guest, Caleb turned toward me. "Mom, you embarrassed us." I stood at the kitchen counter, stacking plates. "I embarrassed you?" "Yes, you could have handled this privately." I placed another plate in the sink. "Your wife told me to leave my own dining room in front of 10 people. She didn't mean it that way." I turned around. She meant exactly what she said. Sienna crossed her arms. "We're trying to save money. Where are we supposed to go in 30 days? That is something you need to figure out. 30 days isn't enough." "It is enough." "You're throwing your own son out at Christmas?" "No," I said. "I'm asking my adult son to find his own home." Caleb looked hurt. That expression almost worked, almost. Then I remembered every time he had stood silently while Sienna moved my furniture, used my money, invaded my private spaces, and treated me like an inconvenience. I loved my son. But loving someone didn't mean allowing them to disrespect me. I picked up the router from the table. "And this," Sienna pointed toward it. "What are you doing with the internet?" "Nothing tonight." I carried it upstairs. The following morning, the house was different. The old arrangement was gone. I didn't announce new rules. I simply stopped providing things I had never been obligated to provide. The internet disappeared from the second floor. Sienna discovered it when she tried to upload work files. "Mom!" I continued drinking my coffee. "The Wi-Fi isn't working." I canceled the shared service. "You can't do that." "I already did. I work from home." "There is a coffee shop 2 blocks away." She stared at me in disbelief. "You're serious?" "Completely." She stormed upstairs. I finished my coffee, then I changed my grocery routine. I bought food for myself. I cooked portions meant for one. I stopped leaving leftovers in the refrigerator for them. I stopped lending my car. I stopped paying their expenses. I stopped solving problems they had created. For 8 months, they had depended on invisible conveniences. Now those conveniences were gone. Within days, they began feeling the difference. Caleb had to take the bus to work. Sienna started carrying her laptop to coffee shops. They ordered takeout several times, but their savings account couldn't absorb those costs indefinitely. I didn't celebrate their discomfort. I simply refused to rescue them from it. By the second week of January, Caleb finally came to my bedroom door. He looked exhausted. "Mom, can we talk?" I opened the door. He stood there with his hands in his pockets. "We found a place." "That's good. But the deposit is huge." I waited. "We need another 2 or 3 months." "No." His face fell. "Please." "Caleb, you had 8 months. We weren't expecting this. You were told the deadline on Christmas." He looked down. "Mom, you're really doing this?" I felt something tighten in my chest. He was still my son, the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard, the teenager who once called me from school because he needed a ride, the young man I had supported through every difficult season of his life, but he was also 32 years old. He had a job, he had a wife, he had responsibilities. "I love you," I said softly. "But loving you doesn't mean carrying you forever." His eyes became wet. "I know. You allowed someone else to make decisions in my house, and you stayed silent because silence was easier." He swallowed. "I should have stood up for you." "Yes." The word was painful, but it was honest. He nodded slowly. "We'll be out by the 25th. "I know you will." He turned to leave, then he stopped. "Mom?" "Yes. Are you going to forgive me?" I looked at him for several seconds. "Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting." He nodded. "I understand." 2 days later, cardboard boxes appeared in the hallway. The sound of packing filled the house. For the first time since they had moved in, nobody asked me where they could put anything. They knew. They were leaving. Sienna became strangely quiet. She no longer criticized my furniture. She no longer moved my belongings. She no longer made demands. Perhaps she finally understood what I had known from the beginning. This wasn't her house. It never had been. On January 25th, a moving truck arrived. The sky was gray, and snow covered the driveway. I stood at the kitchen window with a cup of tea and watched the movers carry boxes outside. Caleb came downstairs one final time. He looked around. The house seemed smaller without their belongings scattered everywhere. He held out his keys. "I guess these are yours." I took them. "Yes," he hesitated. "I really am sorry." This time I believed him. I stepped forward and hugged my son. "Take care of yourself." "You too, Mom." He walked toward the door. I watched him leave. Sienna was already sitting in their car. She didn't come inside. The moving truck started. A few seconds later, their car followed it down the snowy street. I watched until both vehicles disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the curtains. The house became completely silent. But this silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was peaceful. For the first time in 8 months, every room belonged to me again. And I wasn't about to let anyone take that peace away. The truck disappeared around the corner, taking the last of Caleb and Sienna's belongings with it. I remained at the window for another minute. Then I turned away. The house was quiet. Not the uncomfortable silence that had filled it during the months of arguments and tension. This was different. It was peaceful. I walked through the rooms slowly, almost as if I were seeing them for the first time. The living room looked larger without Sienna's glass table. I smiled when I saw my old oak coffee table standing exactly where it belonged. I ran my fingers across its polished surface. My husband and I had bought it years ago at a small antique market. He had spent nearly an hour negotiating with the owner while I stood beside him laughing. For months, that memory had been buried beneath someone else's furniture. Now it was back. I went upstairs. The guest room was empty. The closet doors stood open. There was no expensive perfume on the dresser, no shoes scattered across the floor, no clothes hanging from every available hook. I opened the window. Cold winter air entered the room. I breathed deeply. Then I closed it. Next, I walked to the study. I unlocked the door. The familiar smell of old books greeted me. My husband's desk stood beside the window exactly where it had always been. My sewing machine was back in its corner. I sat in the chair behind the desk for several minutes. I didn't move. I simply looked around. There had been a time when I thought losing my husband meant losing the most important part of my life. I had been wrong. His memory was still here, in the books, in the photographs, in the furniture, in the little things we had built together, and now I could finally enjoy those memories without feeling like a stranger inside my own home. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner. Nothing fancy. Soup, toasted bread, and a cup of tea. I carried the bowl into the dining room and sat at the head of the table. My chair felt comfortable beneath me. I looked around the empty room. I expected sadness. Instead, I felt relief. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about Caleb. I wondered whether he and Sienna had reached their new apartment safely. I wondered if he was angry with me. I wondered whether he understood why I had done what I had done. The truth was, I didn't want to lose my son. I simply wanted my son back, the man he had been before he became afraid to disagree with his wife, the man who used to stand up for people he loved, the man who had once understood the difference between kindness and surrender. A week passed. Caleb didn't call. I didn't call him either. I decided that distance might be necessary. Sometimes people only understand the consequences of their choices when nobody is there to soften them. Then, one Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was Caleb. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. "Hello. Hi, Mom." His voice sounded different, calmer. "How are you?" "I'm okay." There was an awkward pause. "How's the new place? Small?" I smiled. "Small can be good." "Yeah." Another pause, then he said, "I wanted to tell you something." "What?" "I've been thinking about everything." I sat down. "Go ahead." I kept telling myself I was staying out of the conflict. I thought if I didn't take sides, things would eventually calm down. I said nothing. "But I wasn't staying out of it," he continued. "I was letting Sienna make decisions because I was too afraid to argue with her." My eyes became warm. He was finally saying what I had known for months. I should have protected your boundaries. Yes, I said quietly. I know. He took a breath. I'm sorry, Mom. This time, the apology sounded different. It wasn't defensive. He wasn't making excuses. He was accepting responsibility. Thank you, I said. Are you still angry? I was. And now? I looked around my peaceful living room. Now I'm healing. He was silent for a moment. Can I come by sometime? I smiled. Of course. When? Sunday afternoon. Okay. We said goodbye. After the call ended, I walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet where I kept my favorite coffee cup. I took it out, then I made myself an espresso. As I stood beside the window, watching sunlight touch the snow-covered yard, I realized something important. Reclaiming my house had never really been about furniture. It wasn't about the internet, the groceries, or even the Christmas dinner. It was about remembering that my life still belonged to me. I had spent months making myself smaller to keep everyone else comfortable. Now I understood. Peace wasn't something someone else could give me. Sometimes I had to protect it myself, and I intended to do exactly that. Sunday afternoon arrived quietly. At 2 o'clock, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked through the window. It was Caleb. He stepped out alone. For some reason, seeing him standing there made my chest tighten. 8 months earlier, I would have rushed to the door. I would have opened it before he even knocked. This time, I waited. 3 soft knocks finally sounded. I opened the door. Hi, Mom. Hi, Caleb. He smiled awkwardly. Can I come in? I stepped aside. Of course. He entered slowly. His eyes moved around the living room. The oak coffee table was back. The furniture was arranged the way it had been before. There were no boxes, no borrowed belongings, no signs that anyone else had taken control. He looked toward the hallway. You got the locks changed? Yes. He nodded. I figured you would. We sat across from each other. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Caleb said, The new place is okay. I'm glad. It's smaller than this. Most places are. He laughed softly. Then his expression became serious. Sienna doesn't understand why you're still upset. I looked at him. I'm not upset anymore. She thinks you overreacted. I shook my head. Caleb, I'm not interested in what Sienna thinks about my boundaries. He looked down. She says you humiliated her. I didn't humiliate her. I stopped allowing her to humiliate me. He nodded slowly. I know. That answer surprised me. I leaned back in my chair. Are you happy? He looked toward the window. I don't know. That was the first completely honest thing he'd said. I've spent so long trying to avoid arguments that I stopped asking myself what I wanted. I remained silent. I thought keeping the peace meant keeping everyone happy. It doesn't. I understand that now. He looked at me. I'm sorry I let you feel like a stranger in your own home. My eyes filled with tears. But I didn't look away. Thank you. I should have said something the first time she moved your table. Yes. The first time she used your card. Yes. The first time she told you where you should sit. I nodded. I should have defended you. You should have. He took a breath. Can we start over? I smiled. We already started. He looked confused. What do you mean? The day you moved out? He laughed quietly. That sounds harsh. It isn't. I stood and walked toward the kitchen. Coffee? His smile returned. Please, I made 2 cups of espresso. We sat at the kitchen table just like we used to when he was younger. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about boundaries. I wasn't calculating bills. I wasn't wondering what might disappear from a room when I wasn't looking. I was simply having coffee with my son. That was enough. Before he left, Caleb hugged me. I'll call you next week. I'd like that. He walked to the front door, then he turned around. Mom? Yes, I'm proud of you. I smiled. I'm proud of you too. After he left, I closed the door. I stood there for a moment, listening to his car disappear down the street. Then I walked through my house. Every room felt different. Not because the furniture had changed, because I had. I had finally learned that being generous didn't require surrendering my dignity. Being a mother didn't mean allowing my adult child to ignore my boundaries. And loving someone didn't mean giving them unlimited access to everything I had built. That evening, I returned to my husband's study. I turned on the small lamp beside his desk. Snow continued falling outside. I opened an old photo album and smiled at the memories. There had been difficult years. There had been loss. There had been mistakes. But there had also been love. And there was still life ahead of me. I wasn't going to spend it apologizing for protecting my own peace. I had spent 30 years building a home. After my husband's death, I had spent 5 more years learning how to stand on my own. Then, for 8 months, I had allowed someone else to convince me that kindness meant becoming invisible. Never again. I closed the photo album. I walked downstairs and turned on the Christmas lights that were still hanging around the window. Their warm glow filled the room. I smiled. My house was quiet. My life was mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. I had finally understood the most important lesson of all. A home isn't just the place where you live. It's the place where your voice matters. And I would never again give that voice away.